Hi, hello. It is Josh Bowe with Pod Maverick. This is our After Dark recap podcast following the Mavericks' 124 to 118 win against the Charlotte Hornets. The Mavericks are now 5-1 on the season. All 5 wins have been clutch wins. It's been a pretty interesting start to the season, to say the least. And this was a pretty interesting game. Kind of felt like it encapsulated a lot of what both the good and the bad of this Mavericks roster. So it's me, Josh Bowe, one of the editors over at MavsMoneyball.com, also a co-host of Pod Maverick. Joining me tonight is not my normal co-host, Kirk Henderson, because he has a newborn baby to help take care of. It is Jordan Brodus, one of our longtime senior staffers and editors. How you doing, Jordan?
Good. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. I think this is the first time we've had you on since draft stuff. I think we had you on for the live show when we were watching the lottery or the actual draft. So it's good to have you on. This game was interesting in that it kind of felt like a last season's Mavericks game for about the first 2/3, and then the only difference, and then went into clutch and they won, which is like the difference, because last season they would have lost. So I'll just kind of kick it to you to start. Just kind of what were your initial impressions of the game and kind of what stood out to you the most?
I said to you right before we went live that I was sitting there watching in the second quarter, dreading having to be on this show, because I thought this is they're going to trip their way into like either a boring loss or a heartbreaking loss, but it didn't look like it was turning in the right direction, which definitely felt reminiscent of last season. But I do feel even just 5 games into this year that I keep hearing people bring it up. It keeps getting mentioned that most of last season they could not win these exact games, and it's happened now, like you said, multiple times this year already, that they are beating teams in close games. Now, should they be close games if they're taking the steps forward that they want to take? No, probably not. But I think it's better. It's certainly better to be in this position saying, well, we're getting the wins that we weren't getting last year. If you can continue to do that for a while the pieces start to gel, then better things are going to be happening than last season. That's for sure.
Especially, I agree with that, especially when this was clearly not a Luka A game. He still ended up with a good final box score because that's just Luka. Well, not great box. I mean, he didn't shoot well, but he still had 23. Still had 23 points, 12 rebounds, 9 assists, only 4 turnovers, which is pretty good. He didn't have, he didn't have his best stuff. And I think what was pretty notable about this win was, last season, it felt like the Mavericks basically needed Luka to do everything. And then he would be out of gas late in the games in the fourth quarter, and no one else could really do anything. Even after the Kyrie trade, because if anything, they were more depleted after the Kyrie trade. Now I'm looking at this box score, and after watching this game, Grant Williams, 18 points on 9 shots, Dereck Lively, 15 points, 14 rebounds on 7 of 9 shooting. Kyrie didn't have a great game, but still got his scoring in. Tim Hardaway Jr. didn't have a great shooting night, but still got 16 points in. Dwight Powell, 10 points in 15 minutes. Jaden Hardy, a really impressive 14 points in his 14 minutes. His shooting line doesn't look great, but he was 7 of 8 from the free throw line in 14 minutes, which is pretty spectacular. And he kind of felt like the spark plug that turned the game around. And I thought that was cool because like Hardy in the second half of last season had to play because there were no other options. And we've seen this season, he isn't a regular part of the rotation. He hasn't, his minutes have not been maybe as consistent as some Mavs fans would like, but in a way, it kind of, that almost feels like a good thing in the sense that like this team's depth is such improved that you don't need Hardy to play every night, even though, you would like your second year player to get as many minutes as possible. But just being able to have that, like that change of pace spark plug that they can go to, they didn't really have that last season because their end of bench options were Frank Ntilikina and Theo Pinson and McKinley Wright, with no disrespect, but Hardy is just a significantly upgrade in talent over those guys. So I thought that was pretty cool that, I think the depth showed really well in this game. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, to your initial point, the game turned around with Luka on the bench. And I don't know how many times in his however many year career we could say that sentence that like, and that's not even, I mean, yeah, Luka didn't have a good first half, especially, but there have been very few games where the Mavericks ended up with a win where you could say that Luka was on the bench getting rest when the game turned around. That allowed for Luka to be much more fresh in the fourth quarter. Like you were mentioning, like that's been the whole goal, is identifying players to add to this roster that can, whether he's on the floor or not, give him some break from the workload in a game and allow him to have his legs under him in the fourth quarter. And we saw that happen tonight. It was a really funky lineup that that led to that turnaround. I wrote it down somewhere, but I believe it was Kyrie Irving, Jaden Hardy, Josh Green, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Dwight Powell on the floor in that third quarter turnaround.
So four guards and one big, basically.
4 guards and 1 big, and that is 4 players off the bench with Kyrie Irving. So, if there's a world in which, because the Mavericks, I think are putting some stock in having Hardy be down the line, at least that third ball handler scoring option. And he's still growing into that. But if the thought is that Kyrie and Luka can do some trading off while one gets rest, the other one is running the offense, I don't know that formula tonight, that lineup is going to be repeatable too many times this season. But it was exciting to see both the energy that unit brought to the floor, but then also that it did allow for Luka to get rest, and they inserted him into kind of a similar lineup in the fourth quarter. While I believe Kyrie was getting rest, there was kind of a 3 or 4 guard lineup with Dereck Lively on the floor that sort of carried that similar energy early in the fourth quarter that kind of sealed the game in some ways, even though it was a 1-possession game up until the final seconds.
Yeah. Lively was, you mentioned Lively there, but Lively was really, really good.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of an interesting game because watching it, I felt Lively played well. He had a block. I mean, clearly at 15 and 14, he had a great game. I took a look. The Hornets had 72 points in the paint, which is quite the number.
Well, yeah, I have a note from the first half even that at halftime, let me see if I can find it. At halftime, they were 25 of 38 from inside the arc. Oof. Like that is an absurd number. They were 2 of 9 from 3 in the first half. I mean, they didn't shoot well from 3 no matter what the whole game. LaMelo got hot in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, that was
but they had only taken 9 threes in the first half, and they couldn't. They were getting a free runway to the basket, even though Lively was presenting some resistance. But I mean, the Hornets could not miss in the first half. And Lively, as you mentioned, he had 1 block, but that 1 block was a huge turning point in the game. Right before we started the show here, I went back to find when that was in the game, and it was right around the 9-minute mark in the fourth quarter. He rotated over onto Thor, who had what was essentially going to be a layup or a dunk, and met him at the rim and rejected him. And that was just previous to that, Hardaway had hit a three. So that led into that block. And then Hardy went in transition, got fouled, and made both free throws. And they took the lead in that sequence from the three into the free throws, and they never gave it up again. And that lively block, as you're saying, they scored plenty around the basket tonight, but he provided a spark there at the end in a really timely moment, and was a disruptor on the glass enough that it made an impact. And yeah, I mean, I was hopeful, I would say, maybe is the right word, about Lively's development this season and what he could do if given the opportunity. But I would have never believed you if you would have told me that he would have 2 double-doubles in the first 5 games, that he would have 3 games where he had over 10 boards already. He has shown enough sparks here, even in the first 5 games of the season, that it's exciting to see the Mavericks have a young big man like that is making not just like box score, stuffing a box score on any given night, but he's making like specifically impactful plays. That's been exciting to see so early in the season.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, the impactful plays are awesome. And I mean, even stuffing the box, I mean, he's already like had more productive box score games than he did for his entirety at Duke. Like it's absurd. Usually
going back to looking back at his game log at Duke, if anyone has not done that, it's worth taking a peek at to just see how crazy it is that he's been this productive. I mean, you'd hope that when you're drafting a player in the lottery, that they could be someone who can come in and contribute right away. That doesn't always happen with centers, especially, but even more so with a player like Lively, who was a big prospect, but just didn't, because of injury and a variety of other reasons, didn't have just like eye-popping numbers at Duke. So it's been a treat to see what he's done so far.
Yeah, and about the points in the paint, that's not necessarily all on Lively. He faced a lot of situations where he's kind of on an island guarding a 2-on-1 because there's been a breakdown in front of him. There's only so much he can do. The Hornets did shoot 22 of 28 at the rim, which is pretty remarkable. Like, I mean, this is just the Mavericks perimeter defense just could be a little bit better. As we've seen in all of these games, they've been scoring well, but their defense has still been, I think, below average through these first 6 games. So there's still room. So there's obviously some space to work on there. In the first half, the Mavericks only made, I'm reading this right, they made 6 of 26 from 3. And in the second half, they made 8 3-pointers in the second half. So again, they just needed their shots to fall. It is pretty remarkable. Just the Hornets scored 72 points in the paint, and they still lost by 6 because the Mavericks made 14 threes and the Hornets made 8, and 2 is greater than 1. So it's just remarkable. And then more about like the math battle. The Mavericks made 24 for free throws. The Hornets made 12. So I thought that was really that stretch in the third quarter. I think you talked about with that funky lineup. That's when Hardy got to the line a lot.
Yeah.
When they got to the line a bunch in the third quarter, that kind of got them back into the game, because I think in the first half, all those missed threes were kind of fueling the Hornets' rhythm and comfortability in the offense. I mean, it's not like the Hornets were running up and down the floor, but everyone knows this. Even if it's not a fast break opportunity, if you are bringing the ball up the floor off a miss, that's much more advantageous, even if it's a half court set, than it is taking the ball out of the basket. And the Hornets were not having to take the ball out of the basket a lot because the Mavericks were just shooting a lot of blanks. But
and I want to
better in the third quarter.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, kind of off of that thought, is because I wrote it down. Luka and Tim Hardaway Jr. in the first half were combined 1 of 12 from 3. And I want to say it was almost 50-50 split on the attempts, but Hardaway came in, as he always is, just like guns blazing. There was at least 1 or 2 possessions early in the game where he missed, a ball was tipped back out, he took a second attempt on the possession. Like, that's what he's out there to do, and I get that. And I know you and I in the off season exchanged messages and had conversations about, the conundrum of like, why are you signing Seth Curry when you have Tim Hardaway Jr. on the roster? Does it indicate that maybe they're thinking about moving Tim Hardaway Jr.? That's been the soap opera of the last, however many seasons. It feels like every few months we're talking about whether Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to get traded. But in past seasons, Hardaway was sort of the lone guy that did what he does, where he's just out there to like not just space the floor, but run off of like perimeter screens. He's a reliable shooter for the most part. He was sort of the only one that does that. Seth Curry does that also, and I know he has played very little so far.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is not even his first DNP of the season, if I'm correct. And granted, Hardaway has 20 pounds on him and 4 or 5 inches, but I'm curious about Hardaway started the game really cold. What is that going to? How is that dynamic? Let's say that Hardaway doesn't get moved, or that Curry, even for that matter, whenever that like waiting period is up, and if they don't move Curry also, what is that dynamic like? Is it really just going to be either one or the other is going to see the floor? And how long does Jason Kidd wait into a game? Now, this is game 5 of 82, and there's going to be plenty of time for guys to see opportunity, but how long in a game do you wait before you say, like, let's give Curry some of these minutes and see if he starts connecting? The defense isn't going to be there for either of them, really, but Hardaway's advantage is that he has the size compared to Curry. But I'm just curious what that is like, because I was thinking about it a lot in the first half, where it was like, we're just letting him fire away and shoot, and eventually he's going to start connecting. And he had 16 points, but he didn't shoot particularly well because of that first half. But that was a long explanation to my question of like, what is your perspective now that we're actually in the season about that dynamic between two guys that are really just there to shoot the ball?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially because, it seems like even tonight, Jaden Hardy wasn't just Tim Hardaway Jr. that was playing over Seth, but it was also Jaden Hardy. Yeah. So it is weird. And, Dante Exum didn't play. Like, we talked a lot. And like you said, like with Tim, Jaden, Seth, and Exum all coming off the bench, like someone's going to get squeezed every night. And it appears it's going to be Seth and Exum for right now. And, things can change. It is, we have only played a handful of games basically out of 82. But yeah, there definitely seems to be a pretty long leash with Tim. They're letting him kind of shoot his way out of slumps, like within games. I want to say like the difference between his first half and second half shooting is like night and day, because he was, I think, 1 of 6 from 3 in the first half, 3 of 6 from 3 in the second half. So they seem to feel pretty confident in him figuring it out. And I wonder also, is it because of the continuity early in the season? I know Seth has been on the Mavs 2 separate times in the past, but this is the first time he's played for Kidd and this new coaching staff. So maybe they just feel more comfortable with Tim because Tim's been in the system a bit longer. And maybe Seth will get more opportunity as the season goes on. But yeah, I'm not sure. It's definitely going to be something to watch as the season progresses.
And maybe you're right. We went into it talking about the comparison between Hardaway and Curry, but maybe it's really Hardy and Curry. Like that might be the dynamic, because in terms of like size, at least, that's the similarity. Hardaway is not big, but the few inches that he does have over him allows them to use him as a small forward, a fake small forward,
Yeah.
here and there. Because there were times where he was even matching up with, and I would never have wanted that, but there were a few times where he was there, like guarding PJ Washington on certain lineups. And you're obviously never going to get Seth Curry out there guarding anyone close to that size. So maybe it is more Hardy than Curry. And if that's the case, then I'm going to advocate for Hardy to get all of those minutes. I'd rather see his development. I'd rather see him get that opportunity for the most part, because I think that he provides, at least we saw tonight, he wasn't just a shooter tonight. He got to the line, like you mentioned. He had several drives that were like good, hard, aggressive drives to the basket that, like, previously he's not been particularly effective there, like navigating the length of NBA defenders and just timing and athleticism of it. But he had a poster dunk in the I think it was in the third quarter. It might have been the fourth quarter, but had like a vicious and one dunk in the second half. And you're obviously never going to get that from Seth Curry either. You're not getting that from Hardy every night either. But you might be right in pointing that out, that it isn't just a Hardaway Curry thing, that you're dealing with several guards off the bench. And maybe Hardy is the one that's sort of slotting into that spot instead of Curry.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We're going to take a moment here. This is usually Kirk's job, but just to remind everyone if you're watching us live on YouTube, please like the stream, subscribe to the Pod Maverick YouTube channel. That really helps us when we go live, get kind of popping up into your feeds more often. Helps us with kind of search algorithm stuff when people are searching for Dallas Mavericks stuff on YouTube. The more you like our channel, like our stream, subscribe to our channel, that really helps. If you're listening on the audio only, make sure you're subscribed to that as well. Or if you're listening to us, not live, wherever you do want to listen to us, please listen to us. We're going to take a quick break so that I can plug in some ads for our audio only feed. For those of you that are watching with us live, we're just going to take a really brief pause and then we will be right back. Okay, so I feel like we've hit on some of the big points in this game. Concerning the Hornets, this could have been, the Mavericks could have won this game going away. LaMelo got hot in the fourth from three. Yeah. Gordon Hayward struggled huge down the stretch because he was pretty big in the first half. PJ Washington also wasn't great in the second half. So I feel like they did their job, at least on some of the bigger forward scorers. But yeah, Mark Williams and Nick Richards kind of had their way in the paint. And again, I think that was more not necessarily a knock on Lively, but more just the dribble penetration. There was just not a lot of contain there. I kind of want to shout out, we didn't talk about him a lot, but Grant Williams, I feel like he had a great game. Obviously made the clutch threes in the fourth quarter to kind of put it away. I think he helped a little bit on slowing down Hayward and Washington whenever they were on either one of those guys. And I just feel like I think I've said this to Kirk after every podcast. Like it's not that he is like this all-star guy, but it's such a breath of fresh air for the Mavericks to kind of acquire a player who has already established himself as a quality NBA player and not have to rely on Luka kind of turning him into something. Grant is kind of just doing what he did in Boston. Like, he is not expanding his game, but guess what? What he did in Boston was pretty good, especially when you consider where the Mavericks roster is. So he doesn't have to do more than just spot up, hit threes, and play defense.
There's often, I feel like, a trap for players that are sort of like Williams, who come with a lot of experience. Both he was, a lot of experience in college, but then also he had some time at Boston on teams that were ultra competitive, and he played maybe not like one of the most important roles, but he played a key role on a few of those teams. And there is often, I feel like, a trap with guys like that are essentially role players, like high quality, high floor role players, that when they move to a new team that is looking for large pieces to fit into their puzzle, they try to become something that they're not. They try to I guess take advantage of the larger opportunity, maybe, which I was kind of concerned coming into the season that would be the case. I think there's a lot of expectations from fans in terms of what he is going to do in Dallas, but he has been so steady so far, and that could fluctuate, and I think that that's okay. Not all players are the most consistent, especially players that rely on being shooters. Shooters are going to go through waves of downtime or just going cold, but you can't ask much more from him at this point in providing not just the shooting, but he's made some smart defensive plays. He's been kind of a tertiary shot blocker in a few games where he's not doing that all the time, but he's really good helping or in coming up behind a shooter. He had at least one of those tonight. I don't know if it was credited as a block or not. I see that he had a block, I guess, but he had one, I think, on Washington or like one of those forwards where he's pretty sneaky and has some good timing. So, I mean, he is, I believe the number is 23 of 41 from three. That's not like realistic for him to shoot 56% on the season, but he's not just hitting threes. He's hit some late game threes that have made a difference in these wins. And I know there's at least been conversation about like what his level of like vocal leadership is. And I think maybe people fall on different sides of that in terms of like what that leadership is like. But, if he's clicking with these guys and he can be that presence, then they found a good long-term piece, because he is still relatively young, which is nice that he's a guy that's coming in on a new contract that isn't already like getting ready to celebrate his 30th birthday.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. I thought the Denver, I know that we're talking about the Charlotte game, but I thought the Denver game, like, he didn't have an awesome game. He didn't have a bad game, but he didn't have, one of these crazy shooting games that he's been having this season so far. But he still had 13 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks, a steal, 3 of 7 from 3. Like, that line is something like if Dorian Finney-Smith or Reggie Bullock did it in the previous 2 years, we would, like, the fan base would be going bananas, because it was, that's such a big hurdle for those guys back then, was just getting to double digits and scoring. Again, I know it's not their fault. Like, that's not necessarily their games or what they're expected to do considering their pedigree. Like, Grant has much higher pedigree, but it just makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, I always try to hesitate, like slotting in new players into old players' roles or saying that it's a one-to-one thing. But if you're saying that he has taken that, I mean, he has essentially become the starting four like Dorian Finney-Smith was, and he's doing all of the things that you wanted Dorian Finney-Smith to do on any given night. And Finney-Smith did that a lot of the time and played a very important role in that Western Conference Finals run. But to have Williams here doing this immediately, it's not taking him time to like find his place on a new team. He's just kind of come in ready to go. And it definitely makes a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of looking around, I feel like we've kind of talked about everyone I wanted to talk to. I think low-key, I know Kyrie is still in a really bad shooting slump. Didn't have his shot going tonight, but 10 assists and 2 turnovers. I think you mentioned when he played with that unit with the 4 bench players, like, the ball was really moving, and I thought he was finding guys really well with that lineup. So I thought that was pretty good. Anything else you noticed? Because I think otherwise, we could probably start winding it down. But any final thoughts or anything we haven't talked about yet that interest you?
No, I mean, it still ended up being a 1-possession game with several seconds left. And the team shot, I guess, as a group, 75% from the free throw line from what I'm seeing. But the players that you'd want on the line, I mean, if you're looking at Irving and Doncic, they were 10 of 11. Hardy added 7 more and only missed 1. That makes a huge difference. The Mavericks have not always. That's one of the things that in those close games they've had issues with in the past was hitting free throws, and that was when Irving was when the Mavericks traded for Kyrie, that was definitely something that I remember getting talked about a lot. And he only shot 4 free throws tonight, but that was a nice thing to see that they were able to hit free throws, that they weren't getting fouled a bunch at the end, that they had to make a bunch in the final moments. But in a loss if it would have been a loss by 1 or 2 points, everyone would have looked back in previous years and been like, well, they missed 8 free throws or 10 free throws or whatever it was. That helps. And for Luka and Kyrie, who, like you said, neither one shot the ball particularly well tonight, but for them to combine for 19 assists is that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, for sure. I think the last thing I wanted to ask you before we get out of here, and I'll give my thoughts after I ask you, but I want to kind of get your take on it. Is so they're 5-1. All 5 wins are clutch wins. You could argue all 5 wins are against teams that aren't great. Although Brooklyn and San Antonio have both played a bit better since they played Dallas, but Memphis is pretty stinky. Chicago's pretty stinky. Charlotte's also stinky. I think if you look at the standings, I think so. Brooklyn is 3-3. The Spurs are 3-3, and then all the other teams, Memphis, Charlotte, and Chicago, those teams are all below 500. So they haven't maybe had a definitive win, you could say. Denver has really been the only good team they've played this season, and they lost by 11. So do you take anything into that? What are your thoughts on that? Does that bother you? Do you care? Do you feel like that's just something that's going to sort itself out when they play more better teams later, or what do you think?
I think hearing you say all 5 wins are clutch wins doesn't make me feel great. It makes me like, I guess, like we said at the beginning, like we've said it many, many times already to start the season, that like these are the kinds of games they were losing last year, is against mediocre to bad teams in close games. They just couldn't get it done. So the fact that that has not happened yet, we haven't had to talk about a loss to a bad team yet, is good. They can only play the teams that are on the schedule. They're not making the schedule in real time, so they're playing the teams that are in front of them. And because there are, even though we just got done saying Williams has kind of stepped in and it doesn't seem like he's having to take time to adjust, there still are players that are playing key rotation spots that are new to this team. And so that, I think, also plays a factor in some of this. Most of the team was here last season, but in some ways, Kyrie still, to an extent, because there was only so many games they all played together last year once he was on the team, but him and Lively and Grant Williams, and I'm sure I'm forgetting someone else. Dereck Jones Jr., I guess, because he's a starter as of now. There's enough new pieces right now that I think that also takes some time. That Denver game, I mean, they initially that first quarter was horrible, and if you took the first quarter out, you could say they played them leveled, at least on the box score. But I guess what I was impressed by in that game, and what makes me less nervous about your question, is that they didn't really back down from Denver. They fought all the way through the fourth quarter, and that ability to kind of continue to push Denver to not shut off and just go into autopilot, I think is a good sign, even if the Mavericks haven't been able to get a good win. I think that any season, even if it would have been an entirely returning roster, any season takes time to get into a groove. And so they're probably, it's a benefit to them that they're not having to face a lot of good teams right now, so that allows them to play bad teams close and find their way. as they get into a rhythm. But I don't know. I try, the more I watch the Mavericks, I try to like not address the problem until it becomes apparent that it's a problem. And so like they're winning basketball games, and I think there's some things that are concerning still defensively, that against better teams they're going to get exposed. But because they have Luka, and when Kyrie is engaged, when they have Kyrie, offensively they're going to be a lot to handle for any team, good or bad. So that's a long way of saying like I'm not worried about it yet. If they continue deep into November to play every bad team close, then like there's probably alarm bells that need to go off. But at this point, I don't think it's much to worry about. They haven't had to like, there haven't been any like buzzer beaters to beat a bad team yet. Like they've at least found ways to like stabilize in the final moments of the game. And that I think that's important, and they should be able to take that with them into the harder games in the season. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think I'm mostly on the same page with you. Again, it's like when you win 38 games last season and you finish 11th in the West, it feels weird to complain about any type of win that you get in the ensuing season, because, you know, I know that the expectations are high because of Luka and Kyrie, but this was a bad team last season. And they played like it, and their record reflected how poorly they played. You could argue maybe some of it was a little fluky, considering they played a billion clutch games, and sometimes there's a lot of variance in clutch games where it can be a little bit more coin flippy than we might want to admit. But I mean, it's 5-1. It's, you know, it's like, would you rather them be 3-3, but 3 of those wins are blowout wins? You know, I don't know. Like, it feels a little weird to me. Yeah. So the one thing I know, you know, the offense has been there every single game. Even in the Denver loss, they scored 114 points, and for the most part, we're playing well offensively. It was just the defense that couldn't get stops. Even the win against Chicago, which was a little bit more muckier and kind of more of a mud fight, still scored 114 points. And shot decently. And then every other game they've been over 124 or more. So this is starting to feel, I know I wrote about this in the summer, it's really feeling like that 2020, 2019,
yeah, I've heard you say that a
Mavs
couple of
team.
times. Yeah,
it really feels like it, where their offense just keeps them in every game, and maybe their defense is going to hold them back from joining that elite echelon of contender. But also they're coming off a 11th place finish last season, so do they need, like, if they're not a contender this season, I don't think that necessarily puts them behind schedule any more than they were from the moves that led to last season. But so I think they're about doing as well as they can, considering the new pieces, considering, you know, where they're at in the West in terms of talent. And they're
getting ready. They're getting ready to go into tomorrow. So they're getting ready to do their first back-to-back of the season. They go on the road tomorrow, Monday, to Orlando. So that'll be interesting to see just that dynamic, because they have not in recent years, I think, played particularly great on the second night of a back-to-back, even if the first one was a win. But I don't know if that's, I'm just really pulling that off the top of my head. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. But the real test looks like, I mean, they're getting ready to hit a tougher part of the schedule. At least they're taking a step up here, where they play Clippers, they play New Orleans in New Orleans twice. Then they go to Washington the next night, but then they get Milwaukee, Sacramento, and both LA teams right around Thanksgiving. So November will be, I guess, if you're putting the question out there now, it might be good for you and Kirk to revisit that same question. I'm sure you will, but probably 2 weeks from now, 2.5 weeks from now, you may get your answer about, you know, was all of this leading up to this run, or was those first 5, 6, 7 games, was that a little bit of fool's gold, or, you know, did they take that experience of winning some clutch games even against bad opponents and apply that to some tougher tasks, but it'll be interesting because there really isn't like a warm up. It's sort of like they go from playing some mediocre teams to kind of a not a gauntlet, but there's a 4-game road trip, but then also you're playing several playoff caliber teams back to back to back to back. So yeah, that'll be interesting.
Their next 10 games at Orlando, home against Toronto and the Clippers, then on the road for New Orleans twice, Washington, Milwaukee, back home for Sacramento, then on the road for Lakers, Clippers. I mean, in terms of, the Kings are off to a little bit of a slow start, but considering what they did last season, I think you have to respect them as a quality team. Really, Toronto and Washington are the only kind of, you don't want to call any game a gimme, but just more maybe that they'll be definitely favored. And even Toronto presents some challenges, even with their very weird roster that they have. That's lanky and athletic, but can't really score any points, but also has all the arms in the NBA, it feels like. So yeah, by the time we get to Thanksgiving, I think we're going to know a lot about this team. We're going to know even more than we know right now. So that'll be fun. It's more of like, win or lose. I love watching the measuring stick games. Like, it's fun to see them beat up on a bad Hornets team or put up a bunch of points against Memphis, or that's missing all their best player. But I enjoyed watching that Denver game, even though it was a loss, because I just like seeing this team go up against, the best competition, because that's really, I think, how you figure out how good these teams are. So we'll see. I think that's all for me. We've talked for about 40 minutes or so. So Jordan, I think we're going to call it. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate that we can keep Kirk off the airwaves for at least one more night, but he will be back.
He's clawing his way back. He is clawing his way back in all facets.
He wanted to let the fans know, if you're listening to this, that he is going to attempt to do a live show tomorrow night. So that would be Monday night. So that would be probably after the Magic game. So if you've been missing your Kirk, you will be getting your Kirk sooner rather than later. There's nothing we could do to stop him. We can only hope to contain him. So that's probably going to happen tomorrow. So we're going to get out of here. This is Josh Bowe, Jordan Brodus again. Thanks for joining me. This is Pod Maverick After Dark. Again, the Mavericks defeat the Hornets 124-118. The Mavericks are now 5-1 on the season. We will talk to you guys Monday night after the Magic game. Take care.